to locate myself, I need to know the answer to the question of who am I? When we ask the question of who are you, there are two basic ways into that question. There are two models of self. And one we call the four selves, and the other we call the three selves. In order to emerge, in order to transmute, in order to transfigure, right? Meaning in order to actually do the process for which I'm born, right? Which is to become fully human, which is a process of profound and kind of gorgeous transformation. I have to be able to deepen my understanding of reality. You with me? Stay really close, everyone. I've got to deepen my understanding of reality. I've got to deepen my knowing. I've got to deepen my ability to have deep currents of wisdom. I need to, particularly in this moment of abject confusion in the world, I need to actually be in a very deep dharma, a very deep systemic vision that allows me to understand reality as deeply as I can. And then from that place, right, to hold the mystery. Does that make sense? So I've got to be deeply in a dharma, and from that place to hold the mystery. Now, to be in a dharma, I have to study. I can't just consume information in this kind of strange postmodern way, right? In which the postmodern mind basically says, and stay very close here, the postmodern mind says, there is no storyline. There is no essential inherent connectivity. There is no inherent telos. There's no plot line. It's not going anywhere. That postmodern mind is exteriorized. Its exterior expression is the internet, where you're reading, and then there's a link, and then you jump to something else, and then there's another link, and then your attention is hijacked and it goes someplace else, and then you do a little death scrolling, and then you move someplace else, and 2 hours have gone by. Right? How many people kind of recognize that experience? Everyone recognizes that the internet is actually built that way. So it's very important to understand this. The internet is structured and built that way. So the structure, the exterior structure of the internet is the exterior manifestation of the interior experience of the postmodern mind. Does everyone get that sense? And as the postmodern mind exteriorized, becomes the internet. So as opposed to, right, Hawthorne's description, which we invoked yesterday at our board meeting, right, of this deep experience of reading, where I'm following a plot line, where I'm on the inside of the inside, and I'm able to feel reality and map reality and find my place in it and sense its fragrance and its plot line and its direction and its eros and its telos. Instead, I'm jumping around, tugged at, pulled to and fro. And the aftertaste is disorientation and confusion. So the structure of the internet is the exterior expression of postmodernity's deconstruction of a field of value, which then is a field of narrative. It's going somewhere, which then invites the human being to aspire, right? To aspire. I'm reaching for something, right? I realize that I'm part of the field of evolution and I want to transform. And my transformation is real. My transformation is the aspirational architecture of the cosmos. When I don't aspire, when there's no aspiration, then there's no plotline to cosmos. If there's no aspire, there's conspire. And conspire is conspiracy theory, right? Since I don't see the plotline, I say, but it can't be there's no plot line because something must be organizing this, something must be guiding the action, because you can sense that there must be a storyline, right? You sense the sense of storyline deep in your first person. So then we go to conspiracy theory. Then we often fabricate plot lines. In parentheses, not all conspiracy theories fabricated plot lines. Some conspiracy theories are true, and they're labeled conspiracy theories to actually deflect from their truth, end parentheses. But there's also a large body of conspiracy theory that jumps from this fact point to that fact point to that fact point, all of which are independently valid, but then doesn't know how to put them together. Senses that there must be a coherent plot line, but can't find one, so then manifests conspiracy theory. It's about the process of study. So we come together on one mountain, many paths. We're here in this time between worlds and time between stories, and we're committed to actually evolving the source code. We know that the only way to respond to the meta crisis that's actually ultimately effective is to tell a new story of value, what we call a new superstructure of reality, which then naturally generates, raises all boats, allows us to see new possibilities of infrastructure, let's say in artificial intelligence, new possibilities of social structure in the way we do politics, like the way we do technology. So we tell a new story of value because that new moment, that evolution of the cultural source code redefines economics, redefines technology, redefines politics, it raises all boats. We make this Da Vinci move, just like they did in the Renaissance and that time between worlds and time between stories. So I was just with respect and honor and invitation and love and delight, suggesting that the way we can listen, you have to develop a way to study. So one of the ways that I study is what do? I listen deeply. Step one. I take it in. I recapitulate it, right? I review it. I swallow it. Only once I've swallowed it, right? I've consumed it, right? It's part of me, right? I know it. It's not knowledge in my mind. It's not only knowledge in my mind. It's not only knowledge in my heart. Like the Rastas say, it's in my bones, right? Or the Hasidic masters say it's in my toenails. It's the knowing that I have in my toenails, right? It's in me. Now, once it's in me, here's the paradox. Everyone ready for the paradox? So I've totally absorbed it. I am the Dharma. Once it's in me, then I can add to it. Then I can kind of step and look at it. It's in me. And I can say, oh, let me add something to that. Let me clarify that. Let me challenge this in order to make this more clear. Does everyone get that paradox? It's such a beautiful paradox, right? On the one hand, I'm fully open, right, to receive, right? And I'm not sitting and kind of listening. Some people listen and they're listening for what's wrong. Who knows how to do that? People, you listen, okay, that's wrong, oh, that's wrong. And they're actually not listening. They're not letting it in. They find what they think is a chink in the armor, and they actually lose the capacity to listen with mad love. And that's how we have to do in relationship. Right? When I listen in relationship, I've got to listen with mad love, take it all in, absorb it, and then from that place, okay, now maybe we can evolve it. So there's a way to listen to Dharma, which is not an abandonment of self. It's I'm listening from my deepest self. I take it in. It actually reconfigures, reformulates myself. But then that's level one. That's kind of level one. That's the first level. That's kind of, we would call that surrender, full submission, surrender. I swallow the Dharma. Then step two would be, okay, I step back. I rewrite it with the same sentences, but I change the order. That's the recapitulation, right? Or I review it carefully, right? I've stepped out and I look at it really deeply. And then step three, that's level two. That's level two. That's called Havdalah, right? I separate from it and I look at it and I reorganize it. I operate on it. And then you can do level three. And level three is called sweetness. And sweetness means I can actually add something. My voice actually adds something to the symphony. I can begin to contribute originally. But I only get that if I do step one and step two. Does that make sense? Does that make sense, everyone? Right? All right. For how many people is that valuable? And it's critical. right? Without that, I can't actually become a master, but I can't actually become a person who knows how to do sense making. It means I can't become the new human. I can't actually speak my voice into the unique self symphony. Okay. Shaw, welcome everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's insanely good to be with you. And we have let me look at the time. We have an insane day today. Okay. We have an insane day. So let me try and if I can lay out the day. And I know that many of you, right, and welcome, welcome, welcome are here specifically for One Mountain. And so we're going to do a classical One Mountain. And then the One Mountain, though, is going to begin. It's going to begin a larger process. And the larger process is going to be, this is going to be our final conversation in One Mountain around a particular movie. But it's not really about that particular movie. It's about the universal love story. And it's about how we read texts of culture. Does that make sense? Right? A movie is a text of culture. So how do we read text of culture? So what we're going to do now is we're going to put three pieces together. Okay. So we're going to, beginning in a couple of minutes, we're going to start our last conversation around the movie Barbie as a model of the interior voice of goddess in culture now speaking through the story told around the campfire, which today is more often than not the movie. And goddess speaks through the story either to convey a message. She wants to speak. She has something to say. She wants to transmit value, or she wants to scream and say, oh my God, look, you've lost the storyline. Look what you've done. This is the story you're telling. You've actually lost the storyline. And Barbie's actually an expression of the lost storyline. It loses the storyline of Cosmos itself. And Noah and Greta, my dear friends, they literally lost the storyline, but not intentionally. Right? They didn't say, "Oh, let's write this story that undermines the core plot lines of Cosmos." It didn't occur to them that Cosmos has plot lines, and the goddess is pointing towards, or she, or culture, or Eros, or the love intelligence of Cosmos is pointing towards Barbie as an example, a prime critical example of the major box office hit of the last 6 months of this lost storyline. So we're gonna do that, step one. Step two, we're gonna look very, very carefully at pieces of the movie. Okay, we're gonna look at clips, pieces of the movie, and we're gonna go, slowly. We're not in a rush. So we're gonna do this Barbie seminar, right? And it's gonna be as long as it takes. If you have to leave at 2:00 at the top of the hour, that's fine, right? Three beautiful people, Jamie and Topher and Christina Amelon actually are hosting us, right? I was planning on studying with them individually this week, right? After Holy of Holies and meeting with Krista. So Krista and Christina Amelon and Topher and Jamie are actually, as it were, donating their time. They're inviting us into their space and to study with them. We're going to be studying the seminar Barbie, and they're lending us, right, their space very beautifully and kind of sponsoring it, as it were. Right, and they're hosting us. So I want to just thank you all for that in a deep way. And so we're going to go as long as it takes, right? Whatever it takes. So I'm going to do a first piece, which will be kind of a One Mountain piece, kind of to set up our conversation. And then we're going to enter deeply into this Barbie story. But I want to just try and kind of delineate what we're going to do. So we're going to look at the texts of Barbie, which are extremely important. But B, we're going to do it as a model for how you read the text of a movie, how you read the text of culture, how goddess speaks through these texts of culture. 2. 3, I want to do the final conversation in a series of conversations we've had on scripts of desire. That's 3, scripts of desire. Anyone tracking with me here? We good? So we're going to do the final conversation on scripts of desire. Right. And I thought maybe one we would actually put in the chat box so we could actually see it together. So we're going to do kind of Barbie, the last piece of the movie, deep dive. Right. 2, we're going to do how we read texts of culture. Right. 3, we're going to do scripts of desire. Right. Kind of the final piece of scripts of desire, which we'll weave into the Barbie movie, obviously. Right. And then 4, to introduce it all, I'm going to actually introduce it all as the one mountain topic with the model of self, the question of who am I? And I want to integrate two very, very important models of self, right? That are the core, that are cores to cosmoerotic humanism, to this new story of value we're telling. I want to integrate these two models of self as kind of the beginning. Okay. So those are the four agendas. Now, normally, if you come to One Mountain, this is not how we do One Mountain. This is kind of this unusual day. And this is my Christmas present for you, right? So this is total my Christmas Hanukkah present for you today, right? Just, and a whole bunch of people said, I mentioned yesterday at the board meeting, let's create this event and we'll charge for it and we'll make, and this is a gift. Okay. This is like a one-time only, like major, just like, let's just do this. This is going to be a wild ride. If you have popcorn, who has popcorn? Anyone have popcorn? Popcorn's important. You need popcorn. And if you need to go out, get some popcorn at some point, you can totally do that. Take notes, right? Be with us. And we're just going to be, the energy is just relaxed. Okay. We're relaxed. Okay. Oh my God. Okay. Are we ready to go? Are we ready to go? Ready to go. Okay. So here we go. Let's go for the code. And then we dive in. Okay. Here we go. Shah, take us away. Shati, read us a gorgeous code.
Yes. The code on Barbie. Barbie is the most dangerous movie ever made. Who would expect that? But this is the statement. Barbie is the most dangerous movie ever made, and not dangerous in a good way. Not in the way of Chuang Tse, who writes, I came to speak dangerous words. I ask only that you listen dangerously. Barbie has one message. There is no love story. Barbie and Ken are an ontological illusion. Einstein wrote, separateness, the separate self, is the great illusion. Culture claims through Barbie that the love story is an illusion. Only separation is real. Barbie is wrong. There is a love story. Barbie and Ken love each other desperately. Barbie and Ken need each other. And Barbie and Ken are fully unique and autonomous. The great contradiction of autonomy and communion is resolved in ecstasy. The love story is real. We love Barbie. We love Ken. We love Ken and Barbie. And reality is Ken and Barbie. Barbie and Ken all the way down and all the way up the evolutionary chain. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Shahati. Thank you so much. Okay. So when we say Barbie's a dangerous movie, what we mean is it's insidious. It leaves you with a chilled feeling. Now, I'm not going to review all of Barbie because we've done probably 4 or 5 different conversations on Barbie. Okay. All right. So here we go. So this is what we're going to start with. We're going to start with a pre-Barbie, a kind of context topic. Okay, and I'm so excited to have this time together. And what's our intention here? We want to evolve the source code of consciousness and culture in response to the meta crisis and this time between worlds and time between stories. And I talked to my daughter this morning in Israel for about an hour and 15 minutes, and she's deeply enmeshed in the fabric of Israeli society. And literally we were talking about, and she's devastatingly good and devastatingly brilliant, right? And I said to her that I'm kind of blown away by just her unbearable grace, both in life, as a parent, but also as a figure in public life and in the last several months. And one of the things that I realized listening into the conversation, and my daughter is eminently practical, right? So she speaks with a kind of matter of fact, but deep ethos, but she's very like, this is what needs to be done. This is what's happening. And so she doesn't talk about things like the field of value. And I realized that literally the ability to have a conversation about Israel, about Gaza, right? About anything requires both fact and value, right? And fact itself is a value, is the notion that you have to have the facts before you can actually express about something is itself a value. Did everyone catch that sentence? In other words, pre-modern reality was all about values. And then every religion said, we own the values. We have the direct revelation. Facts don't really matter. So if science was in the way of the value of the church, science was put aside. And if discoveries, in researching the human body contradicted the dogma of Galen's medicine, right, which was the church dogma of medicine, then science was put aside. So it was all about value. Facts didn't matter. Along comes modernity, and modernity says value is made up, only facts matter. So everyone get that? Modernity comes along and says, you guys made up value. David Hume, you made up value. What matters is facts. And everyone thought, okay, now we'll be able to, through facts, we'll create science and we'll create a shared narrative of progress. Then along comes postmodernity. And really, at its very core, postmodernity says facts don't matter because a fact is a value. So postmodernity says, actually, not only are values contrived, but facts themselves are a value. The notion that facts matter is a value, and values have been deconstructed, so facts don't matter anymore. So it's all about, now what's left is the story that you make up. Did everyone track that? So all that's left is the story that you're making up. Without that, you can't, right? And if all that's left is the story that you're making up, and your story becomes your identity, then you actually can't create peace. You can't create coherence. You can't create intimacy, right? You can't create a world that works for everyone. You can't create justice. You create a world of radical polarization and unimaginable suffering, but of the kind that we see in so many parts of the world. So what we're here to do is to realize that all of that together, this deconstruction of value, which created a deconstruction of fact, which created everybody lost in their own individual story, without any ability to see the whole and create a shared story for the whole, right, generates the meta-crisis. It's the meta-crisis, which is the explosion of the planetary boundaries, which undermine the substrate we need to survive, based on individual interests, country against country, company against company, rivalrous conflict governed by win-lose metrics, which drives the meta-crisis, at the inability to create a coherent narrative, which will inexorably lead either directly to the very death of humanity or to the death of our humanity, right? The creation of a totalitarian state to create order generated by some version of AGI, artificial general intelligence, which basically in a short period of time locks in, creates a lock-in of its value structure, right, on the whole system. And that's where we're going. The response to that has to be a revolution, but the revolution has to be a revolution in or of a Copernican nature. It means that we have to completely revision how we vision. And the beginning of it is that there actually is a field of value, that value is actually real. Right? We reclaim value. The modern rejection of value is rejected. We accept all the reasons that modernity rejected value. We get the problem. We solve those problems. We create a new vision of value. That's what we've done here at the center. And the first book on that is coming out, called First Principles and First Values, in about 2 weeks. And we've been talking about that a lot in the last couple of years. So we have a new story of value. We live in that field of value. And from that field of value, we can tell this new story of value. And that new story of value becomes a global story. It becomes a global narrative. It becomes a shared story. That story is based on both value and fact together, and the best telling we can have of value and fact. So we begin to have a world narrative that doesn't erase diversity, but it's a context for a diversity, right? It's a world story of value as a context for a diversity. We can have a conversation. Does that make sense? So Dick Nixon and John Kennedy, let's say in the United States, on the opposite side of the political aisle, can be really good friends because they have a shared story of value that they both actually participate in. And we need a shared story of value rooted both in fact and value that every human being on the planet, from China, right, to Russia, right, to Afghanistan, right, to Israel, to the United States, to South America, right, it said that everyone can participate in that story of value and that everyone has a seat at the table and that we can actually empirically validate that story. That's the story. It aligns with our understanding of interiors and exteriors based on the deepest possible human research that we can do. And that story evolves. It's an evolving story. It's an evolving story of value. It's the new Tao, but it's an eternal Tao, which is also an evolving Tao. Okay, that's our context. Now, let me just ask y'all a question, okay? Right, those people who want to kill me now, okay? Right, why, for how many people was that review helpful? It's really helpful to me. Okay, you think, okay, I got that already. Now, what happens is we just, in other words, you begin to actually swallow it. So when I'm saying it again, I'm not saying it again at you. Does that make sense, friends? I'm not saying it at you. I'm not giving a talk to you. I'm reorienting it in my own heart, mind, body. Does that make sense? It's a much more intimate thing we're doing together. And today I said, I want to chat out loud with you, right? So what I'm doing in that reorientation in this beginning is, okay, let me just orient myself. And I do that, just so you know, multiple times during the day and during the night, right? Because that's how I ground myself. You think, okay, we know that already. And I know that there's some people, even some of the people are my closest students and friends. All right, we've heard them talk about that. They kind of turn off. Let's wait for the new thing. Mistake. Right? Don't do that. Right? In other words, and it's every time we recapitulate it, we're actually doing something new. We're deepening. And I've had the privilege with Shi of originating a lot of this Dharma, and I recapitulate it for myself all the time. Because this is not a talk, this is not information, not a podcast. We're practicing by locating ourselves and articulating this new story of value. Does that make sense? That makes sense, everybody? Good? Okay. Okay, here we go. Okay. So I'm going to now take step 2. Here we go. So to locate myself, I need to know the answer to the question of who am I? And this is going to be our introduction, right? From the start, that's going to introduce how we're going to step into Barbie. So I said, I'm going to start with self, the question of self. We're going to go to scripts of desire. And from there, we're going to go to Barbie. That's the order. Okay. And again, it's now 1:43 Eastern time. We usually go to about 2:10, 2:15. It's about another half hour. We're going to actually go deep in. We'll chant, we'll pray, and then we'll go to the next step. So if you're here just for one mountain, this is a funny one mountain, right? Then you can kind of, phase out or beam yourself up or whatever people do, somewhere, in the next, about a half hour before we start part 2, if that's where and if you're staying with us the whole day, oh my God, what a crazy, beautiful ride we're going to take. Okay. So those of you who are familiar with cosmorotic humanism, which is what we call this new story of value, know that we've tried to articulate, and this is particularly for the Unique Self Institute people, which is this new, very, very exciting, important, autonomous division of the center, the Unique Self Institute, which, we'll be doing a big blast off, right, of probably the end of February after our next board meeting where we're finally going to present it. But it's this very beautiful division of the center, which is going to be deepening this conversation around who are you. And we're actually going to probably after the summer, we're going to begin a major Unique Self next level course, probably together with Parallax, our friends at Parallax. And so I want to say something completely new, a new way of saying that whole thing. Which will then introduce scripts of desire, which will then take us into Barbie. Now, when we go into Barbie, I'm not going to review everything we've ever done in Barbie. I'm going to try and hit the pieces that we haven't done. I'm going to try and recapitulate and then hit new pieces so that when we put out our little booklet on Barbie soon, our little mini book on Barbie soon, we can at least have a model of how to look at a movie. Okay? So when we ask the question of who are you, there are two basic ways into that question. There are two models of self. And one we call the four selves, and the other we call the three selves. So maybe if anyone's following me in the chat box, let's write the four selves and the three selves. Okay? Two models of self, the four selves and the three selves. What's the four selves? And the four selves is written up in the Unique Self book and the Self book. And, is referred to in the upcoming book, First Principles and First Values. It's in Loving Your Way to Enlightenment. It's everywhere. Okay? But the four selves is basically the following. I'm just going to do it very briefly. I'm going to assume that everyone kind of knows this, but I'm going to just kind of touch it briefly, and I want to add something exciting to it. Okay, we ready? Let's have a drum roll. Here we go. Okay. The four selves means that when I say, who are you, I can answer in four ways. One way is, which is the classic answer given by Western society. So one answer is, I'm a separate self, meaning I'm a good citizen of the world. The boundaries of me are my skin encapsulated ego. That's who I am. I'm my skin encapsulated ego. That's the end of myself. I can see things, I can know things, but basically I'm a separate self. And the way we often talk about that is I'm a puzzle piece, right? I'm a puzzle piece. There might not even be a puzzle. I'm just an individual puzzle piece. And there might be part of me that yearns for the larger puzzle, but that's an illusion. That's a delusion, right? I'm a separate self. That's what I am. I'm a separate self. And that is how the West understands who I am. It's called an ego self. And to be a healthy ego self, a healthy separate self, is the job of Western psychology. So I go back to my early childhood and I see where I was traumatized, and I try and work out my relationship to my mother and right to my caretakers and to my culture. But I'm trying to work out the appropriate flow of energy within my separate self. That's the basic answer to the question of self. Okay? That's the Western understanding of enlightenment. And Western enlightenment said, who are you? You're a separate self. And all dignity and all goodness and all truth and all beauty comes from that realization. That's modernity. Now stay close, everyone. And the pre-modern idea that I'm part of some larger people is absurd. That's a violation. That's what causes suffering. The notion that I'm part of this larger whatever, nonsense. Right? I'm a separate self. I'm not part of intrinsically any country, any people, right? I'm a separate self. And that notion of identity was a momentous leap in many ways forward, and it created the notion of modern human rights. All human rights are based on I'm a separate self and I have distinct boundaries and I have rights. And these are universal human rights. Fantastic. That's the separate self. 2, Eastern Enlightenment. You with us now? Eastern Enlightenment said, no. There's another level of self. Eastern Enlightenment said, no. Separate self, that's not actually who you are. That's a mistake. And not just Eastern Enlightenment, but mystical enlightenment across traditions. Mystical enlightenment said, that's not who you are. That's a mistake. That's an illusion. Right? That's an illusion. Who you really are is inseparable from the field. From the field. Okay? What's the field? The field of what? So in classical Buddhism, let's say Theravadan Buddhism, it's the field of awareness. True self. I'm inseparable from the field of awareness. Who I really am is not the story of my separate self. The boundary of the separate self is an illusion. And that boundary itself, that Western Enlightenment says ends suffering. Western Enlightenment says end suffering by realizing the dignity of your separate self. You're not part of any larger frame. No, Eastern Enlightenment says, no, your separate self. Oh my God, that is the source of all suffering. You only move beyond suffering if you realize that you are your true nature, your true self is that you're one with the field of awareness. Okay, now let me add to that. And I've tried to, in the last 10, 15 years, in kind of classical teaching, to actually challenge that notion of true self and say that true self means not just that you're one with the field of awareness or consciousness, you're one with the field of desire. You're one with the field of Eros. That actually the experience of true self is that your experience of being interconnected and inextricably connected with the entire field. You can feel the whole field feels you. I'm interconnected with the whole field. I have power. I somehow just by being here, right? I can actually play in this field. This field plays in me. And it's not just the field of awareness, it's the field of desire, it's the field of Eros, it's the field of outrageous love, if you will. That's true self. And I rest in that field. Okay, does everyone got that? That's true self. Okay, is that awesome? Do we got that? Okay, here we go. That's the second answer to who are you? Problem is there's a contradiction between 1 and 2. Does everyone get that? There's a contradiction between answer 1 and answer 2. Because 1 says I'm a separate self, and realizing that I'm not part of a larger field is how I transcend suffering. I transcend suffering. I establish universal human rights, the Western Enlightenment, right? By establishing the dignity and centrality of the separate self. That is the Western Enlightenment. The Eastern Enlightenment uses the same word enlightenment, but it says the exact opposite is true. What's enlightenment? The realization that I'm not a separate self, that I'm one with the field, generally the field of awareness. We've added that mystical enlightenment can also mean more deeply, more profoundly in cosmoerotic humanism. I'm one with the field of Eros. I'm one with the field of outrageous love. I'm one with the field of desire, but I'm one with the field. So which one's true? Does everyone get which one's true? So we've begun to understand that actually we need to bring together, we need to make intimate. We need to create an intimacy between these two positions. Instead of these two positions being at polarity with each other, we need to hold them. We need to move from polarization, from this polarity between these positions, which polarize. And we need to move from polarization to paradox. That actually I'm both separate self and true self. And separate self plus true self creates something. Right? Actually, if you actually get there's actually dignity to separate self, and there's dignity to true self, you realize the following: that actually I'm part of the field, but I'm also distinct. And that distinction is my uniqueness. I'm actually in some profound and real sense unique. I have a unique perspective that's unlike any other. So actually, my separate self is by itself an illusion, but it's pointing to something, which is actually my irreducible uniqueness. So true self plus my irreducible uniqueness equals my unique self. That's a deeper answer. Who am I? I'm a unique self. What does it mean to be a unique self? I'm an irreducible, unique expression of the field of consciousness, but I'm even more than that. I'm a unique configuration of desire, because if true self is the entire field of desire, that's the deeper understanding of what the field is, then my unique self is not just my unique perspective or my unique quality of consciousness or my unique awareness. It's actually my unique field of desire. Does everyone get that? Right? My unique self is both my particle and my wave together. Right? And I'm an irreducible, unique expression of the field of Eros, desire, and consciousness. That's unique self. Okay? And then, number 4, when I realize that my unique self lives in a context of evolution, It's not just I'm a unique expression of eternity, unique self, right? I'm a unique expression of true self. True self is eternity. True self is beneath time and space, right? True self is eternity. Oh, I'm a unique expression of eternity, unique self. No, I'm more than that. I'm evolutionary unique self. Does everyone get that? And as I am living in an evolutionary context, reality is not just eternity, it's evolution. It's not just being eternity, it's also becoming the evolutionary impulse. So I'm a unique expression of the evolutionary impulse. I am evolutionary unique self. I'm not just unique self, I'm evolutionary unique self. I am the personal face of the evolutionary impulse. Does everyone get that? And again, we haven't done this in One Mountain in years, but I just want to locate us. This is the core of the core of the core of the core. Okay? Let me just recapitulate that again. Then we're going to make this fabulous leap. Let me just recapitulate that again, okay? So as separate self, I'm a puzzle piece. And anyone who's done this Dharma with me, which is a lot of you, do it with me in the chat box. Okay, so as separate self, I'm a puzzle piece. I might be yearning for a larger puzzle, but no, there's no real larger puzzle. I'm just a separate self. Is that crazy making? Of course it's crazy making. It causes mental breakdown because I'm yearning to be part of this larger puzzle. And then classical reductive materialism tells me there is no larger puzzle. I'm just a separate self. So it is crazy making, but it's also true. It's true, but partial. I am a separate self. Separate self is real in the mind of God. It's just not all I am. So that's one. Then I move beyond my exclusive identification with separate self. I don't reject separate self, right? As most Enlightenment teachings teach, they say reject separate self, reject your story. No, I don't reject my story. I don't reject separate self. I move beyond exclusive identification with separate self, right? Topher, that's a key sentence. And I realize I'm true self. True self means there's no puzzle piece. There's just the one, the puzzle of the one of the puzzle, the one puzzle, the one. And actually there's no puzzle. There's just the one, right? So we get rid of the puzzle pieces. There's just the one puzzle. There's just the one. The true self, as we've explained it. What's the problem with true self is that when I look closely, I see these little lines between the puzzle pieces. I have this experience of separateness. And I'm told by my teachers that that experience is an illusion. It's not true, but I feel that it is real. I am Mark in some sense. And I can't deny my story. So that's also crazy making. That also causes mental breakdown, right? In its own way. So then I get to the third, I've got to resolve those two from that, the polarity between them to paradox. I'm actually unique self, which means I'm a puzzle piece that completes the puzzle around me. Unique self. But then I realized, no, I'm not just, right? I'm not just that I fit in and by my very existence, I complete it. No. It's not just my being completes the puzzle, but my becoming evolves the puzzle, right? So I'm a puzzle piece that evolves the entire puzzle. I'm evolutionary unique self. Those are the four selves. Okay? No, now just show of hands, right? Was that helpful, anybody? Was that helpful to kind of get that, to review that, to feel that, right? I review it all the time to myself, right? Let's just like, oh, okay, this is key. This is key. This is like core. We settle into it. It's just like in a marriage, right? I don't say, oh, I said I love you yesterday. But we create moments, right? So we go deep into it. We feel it. Okay. So here we go. Those are the four selves. Okay. So now we're going to make this huge leap. Okay. We have a drum roll. We have a drum roll in the house. Okay. We have a drum roll. Do we have a drum roll? Are there anybody drum rolling somewhere around the world? Let's drum roll. Here we go. Okay. Here we go. We're drum rolling. Okay. So there's a second model of self we have. And now Unique Self Institute director, Ms. Molinaire, right? This is for you, professor. This is critical. What's the second model of self we have? What's the second model of self? The second model of self is we call the three selves. And I've tried to articulate this over the last 4 or 5 years. And the three selves works like this. Okay. So the three selves is the psychological self. Brr, says Carrie. Okay, but it's going to get crazy exciting here, Carrie. I promise. Okay. So the three selves are the psychological self, the mystical self, and the evolutionary self / future self. Evolutionary self / future self. I want to get those three selves. Okay. So now these two models are actually one. And that's what I'm trying to explain here. So the separate self, in one of its faces, is the psychological self. So what's the psychological self? What's the psychological self? The psychological self is defined by my past. Okay, psychology. All of psychology, as Martin Seligman pointed out in a 2014 article, right? That's actually a couple of years earlier article, and in a 2015 book with 3 very excellent scholars. The book was called Homo Prospectus. But in an earlier article they wrote on Homo Prospectus, they did a review of the psychological literature. Seligman is a kind of classical academic psychologist, in which they correctly pointed out that pretty much all of classical psychology points to yesterday, to the past. In other words, Western psychology realized the past is a key to everything. So what happened yesterday? What's my early childhood? What's my trauma? What's my relationship to my mother? And as we've often said, when Freud is working with his mentor Breuer in Vienna, and there are this large group of women who have hysteria, who are dismissed by society as being somehow insane and beyond the pale, Breuer has this realization that maybe they were abused. Maybe there's something in the past which is a violation, which is now showing up in the present. Does that make sense? So there was this realization that the past is not just gone. It's not just you have kind of a straight line, right? So this is the past. Now here we are in the present, and the futures are kind of there in front. No, the past actually, let's say this is the past. The white is the past. Let's say this is the present. So that white lives right here, right? In other words, the past lives in the present. This is not really a great prop, but here we go, right? The past lives in the present. Does that make sense? So my early trauma, my early conditioning, my early culture, right? My attachment style with my mother, right? Or my father, am I avoidant attachment? Am I anxious attachment? Am I disorganized attachment? Which is what's called attachment theory, which emerges from John Bowlby after World War II in a monumental work called Separation and Loss, and was picked up by Mary Ainsworth, right, in the kind of mid-60s in a bunch of experiments, and then, picked up in various ways by, an entire host, Kohut, and, et cetera. I won't go down that road now. And if you want to read a very, very good book that kind of capitulates this conversation well, which I wasn't aware of, which my dear beloved friend Kathy Brownback pointed me towards maybe a decade ago. It's a book called The Language of Emotions by Martha Nussbaum, right, which is an excellent capitulation, right, of that conversation of the past. So that's psychological self. So psychological self says the past rules, right? And the key to unlocking the present is in the past. So go back to the past and rework the moment of your birth. Was I wanted or was I not wanted? Rework your early childhood. And this is all unimaginably important. It's one of the great contributions of the evolution of consciousness towards the evolution of consciousness made by the West, is this notion of Western psychology, this language of emotions that comes from the past. So the dimension of reality which rules in the separate self is the past. I'm defined by the past. Antecedent causation causes almost everything. Stay really close, friend, stay really close. Terry, you here, my friend Terry? So Terry, you were reading a book by Sapolsky, I think. My friend Terry Nelson, right, was reading a book by Sapolsky. I think it's around here someplace. Here, that book, Sapolsky. And I think this book is dead wrong, but that's a different conversation. We'll write about that, but it's about free will. So if you're only a separate self, stay close. If you're a separate self, that's what you are. You're a separate self. And the past rules, then it's the past that you need to work with in order to unlock the present, number one. But number two, the past is in some sense causative in many ways that are invisible to you, right? So the notion that, for example, you have free will is not simple for a psychological separate self, especially if you're a materialist, right? In other words, you are simply the material structure of your body, right? You're a separate self. You're defined by the past. The notion that you would be able to choose would be a little bit absurd. because everything in the material world is determined by antecedent causation. And today is formed by yesterday, right? So a separate self, right, in a classical materialist cosmos, right, or a dualist cosmos in which spirit is outside of the world, but the world itself is material. That's called dualism. And so I'm determined by yesterday. And so in some sense, it's not that Sapolsky's wrong, right? But Sapolsky, right, when he talks about determinism, right, and he talks about there being no free will, he's operating on a model, does everyone get this, of separate self. One facet of separate self is psychological self. Does that make sense, everyone? And Keiki and I were talking last night about this notion of freedom. And there's a fantastic movie, by the way, which Ken Kinghorn recommended. It's a great movie. I'd actually realized that I had seen it. I saw it when it came out, and I'd forgotten about it, called The Adjustment Bureau. The Adjustment Bureau. So I want to recommend to everyone, read The Adjustment Bureau. Actually, it was a book originally, but see the movie. But it's about freedom. And the assumption is, well, if you're a separate self, you're defined by yesterday, right? There's no freedom. And one facet of the separate self is, somebody finish the sentence for me so I can feel kind of like I got this across to at least one person. What is one facet of the separate self? What's one facet of the separate self? Stay with me. What's one facet of the separate self? Anybody? What is one facet of the separate self? The psychological self. Does everyone get that? Does that make sense to everyone? So the psychological self is an expression of the separate self. What's the primary frame of time that matters for the psychological self and the separate self? The past. That makes sense? So then we move from there to where? It's really beautiful. We move from there to the, somebody finish the sentence, to true self. To true self. So we go from, right, separate self to true self, right? And true self is very, 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 very consonant with, almost identical to what we're calling mystical self, or the enlightenment self, the mystical self. Does that make sense? And the mystical self says, don't worry about the past. As I'm out the past, fire your psychologist. That's completely overrated, right? It's not where you should be. You should focus on the present. And if you actually step into the eternity that lives in the present, right? The present is not the here and now moment. The present is the full presence of eternity, which is beneath space and time. It's the present's not here right now. It's the eternal now. It's here right now, which takes you into the eternal now. As I'm here present now, and that opens the door, the portal into the eternal now. That's the mystical self. So the true self and the mystical self are actually the same. Does everyone get that? And so if I can actually step into the fullness of the presence, which lives in the present, I will be liberated. So while the separate self, the psychological self, says, I'm liberated by my engagement with the past, the true self and the mystical self says, I'm liberated by what? By my engagement with the, anybody? Help me. Good morning, Vietnam. How we doing? I'm liberated by engagement with the present. You get that? Wow. Right? It's beautiful. It's beautiful, right? So be here now. Right? The power of the now. Right? God's name is now. Hoveh, Yud Hey Vav Hey. Hey Vav Hey. The last three letters of God's name is now, present. Right? And the practice of, right, the kind of the spiritual practice for transformation of the separate self and the psychological self is what? Well, in many ways, it's doing psychological work, right? The contemporary spiritual practice is therapy. And therapy has become a spiritual practice, right, all over the Western world, right? And like many spiritual practices, there's not a lot of competent rabbis and priests and ministers and imams, and there's not that many competent therapists. And the difference between, a really good practitioner and an average one is kind of the world. So all the same problems exist. But a therapist, right, or a psychologist is a form of a modern religious practitioner. Does that make sense, everybody? We good? Okay. Cheers. Let's make up. All right. Let's make a blessing there. Okay. So the practice of liberation for the true self, mystical self, is not therapy. It's not psychology. What is it? What is it? It's actually some sort of practice that takes me into the fullness of the present. So it might be the ecstatic dance movement of whirling dervishes in Sufism. It might be the Zazen sitting practice, right, of classical Eastern, particularly Zazen Buddhist practices, right? It might be a chanting practice of Hebrew mysticism, Hebrew interior sciences that takes me into the fullness of the present. It might be other kinds of silence practices. It might be nature practices that take me into the full spaciousness of the field of Eros and desire, where I can actually feel the field. I might sit and gaze at the ocean. Around the world, people from all walks of life go to gaze at the ocean. It's an intuitive practice. I can step into the fullness of the field of Eros, right, of desire. So this field of true self already has in it this quality of desire. It's not just constant, it's also desire. It's being and becoming, even at the level of true self. But it's not that I'm trying to become, I'm just part of the field. I'm inseparable from the field. It's the realization that I'm part of that field. It's not necessarily a true self that there's something to do there. It's just I realize my identity is I'm part of the field. Does everyone get that? Does everyone catch that? It's not just I am, it's I am the field. So I am awareness, I am consciousness, I am desire, I am Eros, right? I am outrageous love. It's more than I am that I am. I'm exactly, for the last 15 years in teaching and in writing, I've rejected the notion of I am that I am. That's a limit. That's what I'm trying to say. That's a limited version of true self, which is inaccurate. That's only one face. It's the way it's usually taught. It's not accurate in terms of realization, in terms of dharma. Actually, true self is I am that I am. It's also I am desire. It's I am desire. I'm one with the field of desire, right? It's I'm one with the field of Eros. It's I'm one with the field of outrageous love, right? I am being and I am becoming, right? So the emphasis is I am, but I am one with the field. Okay, I'm one with the force. I'm one with the force. How many people have any affection for Star Wars? So there was a Star Wars, I think, was it Rogue One? I think it was Rogue One, right? In Star Wars, where there's a figure, right, who is, this is Rogue One when they are stealing the plans for the Death Star, which will then inform Star Wars Episode 6, where they're going to take the Death Star down. Remember Star Wars Episode 6, where they take the Death Star down? So, and they say, you remember if they say kind of 2/3 into the movie, they say, and, one of our, some of our spies were able to get the plans for the Death Star. So I believe it's the Rogue One movie that is about how they got those plans. So one of the heroes of the Rogue One movie and how they got those plans, I know this is way too much information for anyone, but for those of you who love Star Wars, right, we'll have a moment here together. Okay, we'll geek out for a second. So Rogue One is about how they got those plans. And one of those figures keeps saying, what does he keep saying? I am one with the force. I am one with the force. I am one with the force. So does anyone recognize that? All right. So that's I am one with. Okay, that's true self, right? So true self is mystical self. Does everyone get that? Now, unique self, and it gets very beautiful here, okay? Unique self calls the future in. It's a different moment. Unique self calls the future in. Does everyone get that? So unique self by its nature is also future self. It's very beautiful and it's very deep. So when I'm in my unique self, then I have this experience of I'm not just present and one with the field, I'm unique. And I'm a unique, stay close. I'm not just desire. I'm not just one with the field of desire, but I have a unique configuration of desire. So my unique configuration of desire is trying to call in a specific future. So there's a future self that enters into my present and calls me forward. Did everyone get that sense? That sentence? There's a future self that enters into my present and calls me forward. That's my unique self. And then the fourth self, evolutionary unique self. So unique self and evolutionary unique self together are what we call in the second model future self or evolutionary self. Same thing, which means that the future is now introduced. So if psychological self, separate self is the past, and mystical self, true self is you with me, everyone? Is the present. So then unique self and evolutionary unique self is the call of the future. Does that make sense? That's the call of the future. Like, wow, that's the call of the future. So if you look at the four-letter name of God, there it is. Okay, perfect. If you look at the four-letter name of God, so and I'm reading from right to left, right? So from where it says Yud, that's where a letter starts in Hebrew. Okay, so take the Yud aside for a second. The letters 2, 3, and 4 are Hey, Vav, Hey. You see the name of the letters at the bottom of the letter. So Hey, Vav, Hey means Hoveh, present. Does everyone get that? Hoveh, present. So that is what? What is that? That's mystical self. That's the eternal present. That makes sense? Yud, the first letter, Yud, always represents, in Hebrew, Yihiyeh. It's always future. So it's that which will be, right? So for example, where's my friend Angus, who said earlier, I am that I am, right, Brother Angus? So people always quote, I am that I am from, of course, God's conversation with Moses, that mystical conversation between God and Moses in the book of Exodus, which says, I am that I am. But of course, that's not what it says. It doesn't say any place I am that I am. That's a kind of a wrong adaptation of it. It actually reads, Eheyeh, Asher Aheyeh, I will be what I will be. So it's future. Eheyeh, I will be what I will be. It's future. That's the Yud. The Yud is Yihiyeh. Yihiyeh. That is the future. So what is the name of God? The name of God is a conjugation of the future self and the mystical self. Does that make sense, everyone? The name of God is a conjugation of Yud, the mystical self, and Hoveh, the present self. Okay, let's take that down for a second because I don't want to stop here. We'll just take that down for a second. So now, does everyone see what we just did? So we're going to hold here, and it's kind of crazy exciting. And the crazy exciting is that we just took these two models of self that we've done many times, and for the first time, we put them together. So the 4 selves and the 3 selves are actually one model. Does everyone get that? Psychological self is the same. It's a face of, it's a facet of, it's very beautiful, right? Of separate self. Mystical self is another way of talking about true self. And future self is a dimension of unique self and evolutionary unique self, right? So notice for a second, all of that is missing from Barbie. It's the only thing that lives in Barbie is a materialist, desiccated, separate self. So and I want to just get the sense, there's an impoverished story of self. And an impoverished story of self, which is an impoverished answer, impoverished, poor. An impoverished, a superficial, a shallow. We're lost in the shallows, right? We're lost in the shallows of self, right? And maybe Benjamin, put the word impoverished in, right? Help us out there, okay? Thank you for impoverished. Okay, impoverished means it's a beautiful word, right? It's an impoverished, right? It's this desiccated, it's this poor, right, notion of self, this surface notion of self. And the surface notion of self that informs all of Barbie, right, is what? Separate self. That's it. That's all that's there. And it's, of course, it's not even a healthy separate self. It's a broken shadow form of separate self. That's what the Barbie movie is based on. And that's unimaginably important to understand going into the movie. That we're actually, the entire culture is operating off of this very, very, very narrow notion of self, which ignores empiricism. It ignores all of the empirical realizations of true self and mystical self in all of the interior sciences, in all of the great traditions across all eons of time. In other words, the realization of true self and mystical self by the most subtle and speculative minds through time, completely ignored. Number 2, it ignores all of the evolutionary sciences, which basically understand that the person is part of this larger system, right? Systems theory, complexity theory, chaos theory, evolutionary theory, emergence theory, right? All expressions of becoming, right? That I'm actually a unique dimension of becoming, and the realization of the sciences that there's a future that's calling the present into into its next phase of emergence, which is what we called citing Whitehead, but it's also, you could cite the Hebrew interior scientists, the lure of becoming, or the lure of the lure, the allurement, the lure of creative emergence. So that's the call of the future. So in essence, I just want to kind of get this, just how shocking it is. So we put a movie into the center of culture, which essentially ignores, right, who the person is. It ignores all of the empiricism of true self, mystical self, and right, located in the classical interior sciences. And it ignores all of the empiricism of evolutionary systems, complexity, chaos, theories, and sciences, and gives us a desiccated notion of self. That's what Barbie does at the start off. It's great. That's a good place to hold. But for us, what that allowed us to do is to begin to locate us here in One Mountain, Many Paths, that the beginning of the response to the meta crisis is actually a new answer to the question of, who are you? Right? Who are you? Oh my God. And we'll finish here. Let's kind of break for a second, and we'll chant, and we'll pray before we go to part two. Who are you? Who are you? So let's do it together, and we can just literally do it together. And it's such a crazy joy to do together, right? And before we do it, we just kind of read the text together. So was this slow enough for everyone? Was everybody able to track through this? Okay. So it just really locates us, like, oh, okay, this is who we are. This is where we are. This is our location. Right? It's beautiful. And this is core, foundational. And if we never, God forbid, met again, and you got this, it changes everything. And remember that as evolutionary unique self, I participate and play my instrument in the unique self symphony, right? That's what the unique self symphony is. But I actually have a unique instrument to play in the unique self symphony that calls forth this evolving music, that calls forth this evolving symphony, that calls forth the future, right? So separate self, psychological self is yesterday. True self, mystical self is the present, today. And mystical self, true self is today. And unique self, evolutionary unique self, future self is tomorrow. Okay, let's hold here for a second. Can we breathe? We can breathe. Okay, that's part one.